Thank you. Thank you, Janet, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here tonight. I've been keeping bees since 2007 when my niece gave me a beehive as a Christmas gift. And my hobby ended up turning into my career. I set up my first hive in Dick Radell's backyard. I didn't know anything about city ordinances, and I was worried about my neighbor complaints. I was too afraid to have my hive out in the open, so I stuck it along my neighbor Dick's tree line so that no one could see it. Back in 2007, the more I read about honeybees, the more I realized how much I didn't know. 7 years later, nothing much has changed. I'm still reading, and I still don't know enough. The vast amount of information about bees and beekeeping is daunting. Back in 2007, I was sifting through mountains of information to determine what was right for me as a new beekeeper. Do I use a Langstroth hive, a Ware hive, a top bar hive? What kind of bees should I order? Carniolan, Italian, Minnesota Hygienic, Belfast, Russian. Do I use wooden frames or plastic frames? Do I use chemicals to treat parasites and infections? Do I feed the bees? What should I feed the bees? Do I smoke the colony? Should I use a fume board? How do I extract? Should I purchase an extractor or should I rent one? And what is CCD anyway? Should I even attempt to raise honeybees by myself? So how does the hobbyist sift through all the information to find out what is best for the bees? The answer is we've come to the right place. We rely on each other to discuss our successes and our failures. This is still the best place to discuss what has worked or what hasn't worked in our bee yards. Tonight, I plan to talk about Russian bees. I don't have all the answers, but I have discovered a few things about Russian bees that I think will be of great interest to you. With the onslaught of viruses, pests, and diseases, the more we learn about our bees, the better capable bee handlers that we will become. My presentation tonight has 3 parts. First, we will look at the history of the Russian bee. We're going to explore the Russian bee's characteristics and understand why those qualities are significant. Second, we'll answer the question, why should I raise Russian bees? Finally, we will explore the question, are Russian bees a good bee for me to raise? We'll talk about how Russian bees require a different management style and what it is required to successfully manage a Russian bee colony. I plan to limit the presentation by not discussing genetic purity versus genetic diversity. There is much to be said about this debate, and it requires a geneticist to speak with authority on these issues. My presentation is limited to my research and experience raising Russian bees over the last 5 years. At the end of the presentation, I'll take questions and hopefully I'll have a few answers. Let's start at the beginning of the Russian bee saga. The Trans-Siberian Railroad was completed in 1905. It covers 6,850 miles from Moscow to the Primorsky Territory. If you wanted to board this train today and travel its length, it would take 15 days and about $15,000. But in 1905, the Primorsky Territory was populated by Apis cerana. Apis cerana is called the Oriental honeybee, and it's also known as the Asian honeybee. This area is where the USDA in 1996 found a honeybee that was resistant to Varroa destructor. Along with the new railroad came the importation of Apis mellifera, the western honeybee. It's also known as the European honeybee. Apis mellifera is a highly domesticated honeybee, and it's moving into a region previously inhabited only by Apis cerana. Here we see the physical differences between the western and the eastern honeybee. Their size and wing structure can be used to identify them. Apis mellifera is on the left, it is the larger bee, and Apis cerana is on the right. Apis cerana is a natural host of varroa mites. This means that the hosts do not frequently get the disease carried by the pathogen, or if the infection is carried by the bee, it's asymptomatic and not lethal. So clearly, Apis cerana had very desirable traits that the USDA was interested in testing. For over 100 years, Apis cerana and Varroa destructor have co-evolved into a balanced host-parasite relationship. For instance, Varroa only reproduces on the drone pupae of Apis cerana. Since drones are only available part of the year, high populations of mites never build up. Overall, the USDA test labs repeatedly show that Primorsky honeybees appear to have several mechanisms which act together to provide substantial resistance to Varroa destructor. According to the Baton Rouge Bee Lab, it is unlikely that all of the factors that contribute to the resistance have been identified, since a substantial number of hypotheses remain untested. However, the diversity of tested traits that contribute to Varroa's resistance suggests the genetic structure underlies the overall resistance and can provide opportunities for further resistance through selective breeding. When Apis mellifera met Varroa, life inside the hive was much different than Apis cerana. Varroa was able to reproduce on worker pupae at alarming rates, and colonies collapsed. The overwhelming response was to control the mite population using chemicals such as fluvalvanate. Unfortunately, the mites have quickly adapted themselves to fluvalvanate, building a resistance to it. Research has repeatedly shown that feral bees or bees managed without miticides have intense natural selection pressure, allowing only the most mite-resistant colonies to survive. A beekeeper friend of mine asked me the other day, why haven't researchers found a cure for Varroa? And my response was, well, they have. Marla Spivak, leading bee researcher and head entomologist at the University of Minnesota, has been telling us for years how to stop Varroa. Stop perpetuating bees that can only survive with chemical help. We've all seen how the mite develops resistance to each new chemical. Bees without chemicals will do exactly the same to develop resistance to the mite if we just allow selective pressure to exert its effect. The scientific community says that there will be a few new chemicals that we will have available to us, but that we need to start practicing smarter beekeeping through integrated pest management centered around producing a bee that is stronger than the mite. Biologist Randy Oliver in Scientific Beekeeping said he got tired of getting his butt kicked by Varroa. His first step in getting the upper hand on the mites was to stop coddling wimpy bees with synthetic chemicals. This decision cost him dearly and the colonies collapsed right and left, but thanks to the genetics of selected mite-resistant queens, his colonies now look better than they have in many years, and every box is again full of healthy bees. An update from Randy said that he ran 700 colonies this summer and runs his bees next to large commercial operations, where his bees are exposed to a full gamut of mites and other parasites. Randy said that his bee stocks are not completely Varroa resistant, but that the bees do such a good job that he now considers Varroa to be more of a nuisance than a demon. I can report that last year Sweet Mountain Farm suffered the harshest winter, the second coldest on record. Many of our hives died out in mid-January when we had sustained negative 45-degree wind chills. Most of the honey was still on the hive in the spring. There was only one beekeeper on the island that had one of his 2 colonies survive. The rest were wiped out. He is the only beekeeper that raises a Russian hybrid. Going into winter, I had only 3 colonies where Varroa was recorded at 3 to 4 mites per 100 bees. That is an extremely low mite population, yet all 3 hives that had the Varroa died out. There were 8 colonies that survived, with 1 hive that completely tipped over. I assumed that the hive was dead, but in the spring the hive was thriving on the ground. Those colonies were split and allowed to naturally requeen themselves. Let's do a recap here of section 1. The goal of bee breeders is to produce bees with desirable traits. Most of the time, it's honey production and gentle behavior that is selected. The Russians are bred for mite resistance. USDA scientists imported a honeybee from Russia that is naturally resistant to Varroa mites. The imported queens were selected from bees which had been exposed to mite infestation for nearly a century. If natural selection can produce tolerance to Varroa, then Russian bees must be worthy of our exploration. Since 1997, the new Russian strain has gone through quarantine and testing, being released to American beekeepers through the Russian Bee Breeders Association. Ongoing selection for further resistance to Varroa is being carried out by a team of top USDA scientists from the Honeybee Breeding Genetics and Physiology Laboratory in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It's hoped that the Russian bees will provide Varroa-resistant genes that will let us take a giant step forward in breeding tougher bees.